back to the Brittany Hughes Show. Of course, this week in news that wasn't, the media has largely spent an entire week completely ignoring an assassination attempt on a sitting Supreme Court justice because it does not fit their narrative. Now, of course, we're talking about pretty much the media besides conservative news outlets and, of course, Fox News, which has covered this story quite extensively. You would think that this would have been all over the front page. This would have been wall-to-wall coverage. I mean, there was a man that actually showed up to a sitting Supreme Court justice's house with a bunch of weapons in a bag and said that he wanted to kill him. And apparently that doesn't even warrant a mention. And when the media has mentioned it, they have attempted to downplay it as a gigantic nothing burger. Meanwhile, at the same time, dozens of pregnancy centers that offer resources and care for women who have chosen to keep their babies and carry them to term, dozens of pregnancy centers across the country have been firebombed and vandalized, with one very militant pro-abortion group saying that it is now open season on anybody that does not support radical abortion rights. So, all of this is, of course, extremely concerning, not only from a pro-life perspective, but when you have a society, when you have a culture that has decided that this is allowable, when you have a media that has decided that this is not news, we're not going to talk about abortion or pregnancy clinics being bombed by abortion supporters. We're not going to talk about a sitting Supreme Court justice and a threat against his life at his home because it doesn't fit the narrative, because he does not vote the way that we want him to on Supreme Court decisions. When things have gotten so one-sided and so incredibly skewed, when you have lost Bill Maher in the discussion here, when even he is calling out liberal media bias, we have a serious, serious problem. So the story, first of all, let's kind of set the table here. We need to understand what exactly happened because, again, unless you tune into Fox News, chances are it's very unlikely that you heard this story except maybe in passing. So a California man was actually indicted for attempted murder, didn't get a slap on the wrist. This isn't something like a catch and release where they just, they thought something may have been going on and it ended up being nothing, and so they let him go. This is a guy that was actually indicted for attempted murder against a sitting Supreme Court justice, 26-year-old Nicholas Roski. Now, according to the FBI, he was apparently upset about the recent shooting at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas, a couple of weeks ago, and the leaked draft of a Supreme Court decision that would overturn Roe v. Wade that we're still waiting to be handed down, probably not this week, but in the coming weeks. And he was really pissed off about all of this. And so he took it upon himself to pack a whole big bag full of weapons and other murdery sort of paraphernalia and head over to Kavanaugh's house. He found his address on the internet. He ended up calling the police on himself, saying that he was planning on committing suicide and that he had just figured if he was going to die anyway, why not go ahead and take out a Supreme Court justice that was pissing him off while he was at it. He was arrested near Kavanaugh's house on June 8th. Wearing all black. He was carrying a Glock 9mm, pepper spray, a hammer, a screwdriver, a nail punch, a crowbar, a pistol light, zip ties, and duct tape. This guy was straight out of horror film 101. I mean, like this is he's almost like a serial killer caricature. Not exactly sure what exactly he was planning on doing. I don't know if he was thinking that he was just going to shoot Kavanaugh. I don't know if he was thinking that he was going to incapacitate him and zip tie him and throw him in the trunk of his car. Not really sure what he was going for here, but he had a whole bunch of crap that indicated that he was up to absolutely no good. So again, it would have been bad enough if somebody had shown up to Kavanaugh's house with a handgun, threatening Kavanaugh's life. That would have been bad enough. This was a guy that had planned this out, had gone through the trouble of packing all of this stuff, called the police on himself, said that he was scared that he was going to do something, ended up getting arrested. And apparently nobody in the media thought that this was worth a mention. The media just completely glossed over this story as though nothing had happened. None of the Sunday morning talk shows touched it. Not a single one. When CNN did mention it, they downplayed it as though nothing had really happened and we couldn't be sure of the details. And, we don't really know if this guy was intending harm. We don't know what kind of weapon he had. We're not really sure. And by the way, there's a lot of anger on both sides of this issue. Check out CNN.
This is an extremely passionate issue. There are emotions on both sides. The risk truly comes from both sides of this abortion debate.
The threats coming from both sides of the abortion debate.
Well, the way that the newest terrorism advisory bulletin is framed is that this threat exists on both sides. The risk for domestic violent extremism, again, particularly with the abortion debate, exists on both sides.
Okay, so again, acting like this really wasn't a big deal. It was buried on page like 847 of the New York Times. Also, by the way, if you try to Google this story, if you try to Google Kavanaugh assassination attempt, Google doesn't bring up any suggestions. It's almost like the search engines themselves don't even really want you to find this story. It's absolutely stunning, the blatant hypocrisy of the leftist media here. They're not even trying to hide it. They're not even going so far as to maybe report the story and maybe just spend a little bit less time on it. No, they're not even mentioning at all. Again, we've got a guy showing up to a sitting Supreme Court justice's house because he is pissed off about guns, ironically, considering the fact that he showed up with a gun, but he's pissed off about guns, and he's pissed off that abortion rights might be taken away, and he doesn't like how Kavanaugh voted on it. And he's threatening to kill him. And it's completely poo-pooed by a media that has spent the last several years ranting and raving against the rhetoric used by those right-wingers and the rhetoric used by President Trump to incite violence and to stir up anger. That is all we have heard now for years. But when it's a crazy left-wing nut job that shows up with a whole bunch of, weapons in a duffel bag outside of a justice's house, well, now that's not really worth a mention. Now both sides are really angry, and maybe everybody just needs to cool down a little bit. I mean, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi herself didn't even have a good answer. Here she is defending blocking a bill in the House that would have upped security for SCOTUS justices, saying that nobody was actually in danger over the weekend for lack of security. Check this out.
How can you say that the justices are protected when there was an attempt on Justice Kavanaugh's life? You said the justices are protected, but there was an attempt on Justice Kavanaugh's life.
It's protected. The justices are protected. This issue is not about the justices. It's about staff and the rest. The justices are protected. You saw the Attorney General even double down on that.
But this is about security for the justices. An armed man showed up near Justice Kavanaugh's house to try to...
We're working together on the bill that the Senate will be able to approve of, because that's what... We can pass whatever we want here. We want it to be able to pass the Senate. So I don't know what you're talking about, because evidently you haven't seen what the debate is, and not debate, but what the language is. There will be a bill, but nobody is in danger over the weekend because of our not having a bill.
Thank you.
Absolutely unbelievable. And we know this, by the way, because if you look at the few times that this has been mentioned, if you go over to Twitter and you look at the left attempting to defend why the media is downplaying this, defend why there hasn't been much of a mention, you're going to see a lot of arguments about how, well, it really wasn't that big of a deal. Yes, it could have been really bad, but this was a guy, he called the police on himself and nothing actually happened. Shots weren't actually fired. So when we're talking about a threat on a SCOTUS justice's life? Was it actually a threat, considering he didn't actually do anything? First of all, I will point out to you, the man has been indicted for attempted murder. That in and of itself is a story. Regardless of how far he took it, regardless of whether or not he showed up with a bunch of weapons, he fired the weapons, Kavanaugh was actually hit by a bullet from the weapons, regardless of those details that the left is trying to split hairs on whether or not this is a story based on the amount of blood that was or was not shed here. Regardless of that, this is a man who was actually indicted for attempted murder, and that by itself makes this a story. And you know it absolutely would be if the roles had been reversed, and if this had been some Trump supporter in a MAGA hat that had shown up to Kagan's house or to Sotomayor's house and made the same exact threats. And we know this because if you look back to 2018, and we're going to go back in our memory bank here a little bit, do you remember the bomb scare that absolutely dominated the news cycle for days?
Day 643 of the Trump administration, 13 days out now from the midterm elections. And the president has held, as of tonight, his latest rally in Wisconsin as the hunt is on for whoever sent explosive devices to his political opponents. The targets are all public figures, including President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, her husband, the former president, and all are frequently attacked by Donald Trump at his rallies and on social media.
A whole bunch of people got these manila envelopes with these homemade pipe bombs in them that, first of all, none of them actually got to the intended recipient. Okay, it wasn't like Brennan and Obama and Clinton were sitting at their desks opening up these envelopes thinking, oh my gosh, what is this? What is this handwritten envelope here? Wonder what's in it. None of them actually got to their intended targets. And even if they had, they would not have worked. Okay, these were non-functional pipe bombs. I think they were filled with nails and like pool chemicals or something. So again, the guy that put this together and sent them in, it ended up coming out that apparently he had been abusing substances. He was homeless at the time. He was literally living in like a van down by the river. So he wasn't in his right mind. He ended up being sentenced to 20 years in prison for it. He apologized profusely, saying that he was on all kinds of stuff when it happened. Of course, that doesn't make it any better. This is not in defense of sending pipe bombs to people. You should not send pipe bombs to people. Kind of goes without saying. None of this is okay, no matter what side it comes from. None of this is okay. You do not threaten someone's life because they do not vote the way that you like or because they support something that you don't agree with. But if you remember that story, it absolutely dominated the headlines for days. For days. And again, if we want to use the amount of violence and bloodshed that was actually committed as sort of your benchmark for deciding whether or not these things are important and whether or not this makes a story, remember that these were homemade bombs that would not have even detonated. Prosecutors said in court they were not functional. They were not actually going to cause harm. They didn't actually make it to their intended recipients in the first place. They were simply addressed to them. They were intercepted along the way. And a guy ended up going to prison for it for 2 decades. He's going to be in his 70s before he's released. Now, I would say that absolutely was a story at the time. Now, whether everything else should have been dropped for that one story for days like it was, that's a different argument. Again, we're talking about a media that was seizing on every single opportunity to paint Donald Trump and the right as this massive, violent movement that was looking for bloodshed at every single turn. Donald Trump couldn't scratch his nose without the left calling it a dog whistle to some nut job out there calling for violence. John Brennan at the time said this: unfortunately, I think Donald Trump too has helped to incite some feelings of anger, if not violence. So again, the minute that this happened, automatically it was used as a weapon against Donald Trump to blame him for every single bit of violence that could ever be perpetrated by anybody on his side, even if the violence didn't actually occur. So, if that was a story in 2018, enough to dominate the news, enough to be splashed all over the headlines for days, enough to be on CNN's chyron for hours at a time, even though it was a bunch of bombs that didn't work and nobody was actually hurt. Why then did a guy showing up at Kavanaugh's house with a bunch of weapons intending to do him harm, who was then indicted for attempted murder, why did he not warrant the same coverage? Why did he not warrant even a fraction of that coverage? Particularly given the fact that this isn't just about somebody committing violence or attempting to commit violence against an official on the other side of the political aisle. This is also about the so-called incitement to violence that we see constantly leveled against the right. These accusations of dog whistling. Interesting how since Joe Biden became president, nobody's whistling to any dogs anywhere. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that this is an administration that can say all kinds of stupid wackadoodle things, and that seems to be perfectly fine? Joe Biden can stumble all over himself, drooling on his own shoes, and nobody questions his mental competency. Nobody wants to see his doctor's reports. But if you look back, under the Trump administration, absolutely everything was a call to violence. Interesting, considering the fact that Senator Chuck Schumer had this to say.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Lori Lightfoot, over on Twitter, mayor of Chicago, she tweeted on May 9th this: to my friends in the LGBTQ community, the Supreme Court is coming for us next. This moment has to be a call to arms. So we're not calling that a dog whistle? Literally telling people that this is a call to arms against the Supreme Court justices that didn't vote her way? Again, referring here, of course, to this insane leftist notion that when abortion rights are overturned and sent back to the states, that somehow is going to pave the way for civil rights to be decimated. All of a sudden, interracial marriage is going to be banned. All of a sudden, we're going to go back to banning gay marriage and all of this stuff that has absolutely nothing to do with the issue at hand, has absolutely nothing to do with abortion rights, and of course would not happen, not only because there is no appetite whatsoever within the conservative movement to take on those milestones. They don't There's not support for it. There aren't votes for it. It's the most ridiculous, insane notion, but that's the narrative that the left has ginned up here because they can't argue on the merits of abortion itself. They know that. So instead, they've got to kind of change the tables up here, and they've got to find another angle to go for. And so, of course, that's now that if abortion rights get sent back to the states, all of a sudden, black people aren't going to be able to marry white people, and your marriages are going to be invalidated, and blah, 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 blah. So now that has to be a call to arms against sitting Supreme Court justices. And then just a few weeks later, a left-wing nut job does exactly that. Takes up a call to arms and shows up to Kavanaugh's house armed. And we're just supposed to pretend that wasn't an incitement to violence? Are you kidding me? Have the standards changed that quickly? I mean, we're talking about this. There are double standards, and then there are double standards, if you know what I mean. There's the left, and this is kind of what they used to do a little bit. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like it wasn't quite as blatant before in years past. Donald Trump broke these people. Donald Trump absolutely broke these people. Now they're not even pretending to have any semblance of standards, no semblance of journalistic integrity. All of that has completely gone out the window. And now we are literally just going to pick and choose what we report on and what we don't, and who we blame and who we don't, based solely on their politics. So let's switch it up here just a little bit. If we're saying that it takes actual acts of violence If we're saying that this was a nothing burger because nothing actually happened, and we're just going to gloss over all of the left-wing politicians that stirred this up, and we're just going to downplay it because no violence actually occurred, right? Nobody was actually hurt. Nothing was actually done. Okay. Well, then let's talk about this. And why that's clearly not the reason that this wasn't in the news cycle, because if it takes actual violence to hit the headlines, then this should have been all over it this week. There has been actual violence perpetrated against pro-lifers and pro-life clinics in the past few weeks like we rarely see. At least 4 pro-life clinics have actually been firebombed. I don't mean a couple of windows have been blown out. I don't mean somebody just spray painted a door. I mean actual incendiary devices have been thrown through the window, and some of these places have been scorched beyond recognition. In Gresham, Oregon. Here is Madison, Wisconsin. Here's a pro-life clinic in Amherst, New York. This one is interesting. So this clinic was burned so bad, they actually had to reopen in an undisclosed location that they say they're only giving out to patients.
Compass Care Pro-Life Pregnancy Center in Amherst was in flames when first responders arrived early this morning. Now it looks like this, broken windows and smoke damage throughout. CEO Jim Hardin says while he's outraged by the attack, he's not surprised. Recently, Compass Care has been receiving threats online and in person.
When they destroyed this facility and destroyed it, they eliminated the ability for women to receive free care, the care they so desperately need and deserve.
This is interesting because this comes shortly after the governor of New York actually increased taxpayer-funded security for abortion clinics by about $10 million and didn't give a dime to pro-life clinics. Dozens of other pregnancy clinics have been vandalized with messages that include things like, if abortions aren't safe, neither are you. So who's behind all of this? So a group called Jane's Revenge says that they are behind most, if not all, of these attacks. So this is a group that draws its name, obviously, from Jane Roe in the Roe versus Wade case.
The graffiti on the side of the building says Jane was here, and the CEO says he thinks this represents Jane's Revenge, which also took responsibility for another firebombing of a pro-life organization in Madison, Wisconsin in May. It's a reference to the Jane Collective, which provided underground abortions in Chicago in the 1960s.
So this is Jane's Revenge. They are militant abortion activists. So they've taken the credit for vandalizing dozens of abortion clinics, including the ones that have been firebombed. They wrote a letter on June 15th that was reported on by the Post Millennial, and this is what they said. And again, if it takes actual violence to make the headlines, you know that's not the standard, because this would have been all over it. Not only have they vandalized pregnancy clinics, not only have they burned some pregnancy clinics literally nearly to the ground, they penned a letter threatening even more violence and saying it's now open season on pregnancy clinics. Here's what they had to say. Your 30 days expired yesterday. We offered an honorable way out. You could have walked away. Now the leash is off, and we will make it as hard as possible for your campaign of oppression to continue. They kept going. We promise to take increasingly drastic measures against oppressive infrastructures. Rest assured that we will. And those measures may not come in the form of something so easily cleaned up as fire and graffiti. Sometimes you will see what we do and you will know that it is us. From here forward, any anti-choice group who closes their doors and stops operating will no longer be a target. But until you do, it's open season and we know where your operations are. You are already one of us, they said to their supporters. Everyone with the urge to paint, to burn, to cut, to jam. Now is the time. Go forth and manifest the things you wish to see. Okay. First of all, if that doesn't sound like an absolute bat crap crazy lunatic, I don't really know what does. This is written in the vernacular of an extraordinarily unhinged group of persons. It is incredibly violent. It is incredibly threatening. We are blessed from God, quite frankly, that so far nobody has been hurt, but rest assured, my bet is that someone will. This is a group that is declaring open season on pregnancy clinics and has already perpetrated violence against them on the heels of an assassination attempt on a sitting Supreme Court justice who voted in favor of sending abortion rights back to the states. Abortion advocates are growing increasingly more violent against pro-lifers and pregnancy clinics and are threatening to ramp up their attacks. And that's not being mentioned by a liberal media that has spent the last half a decade, if not more, squawking hysterically about violence being incited by the right. Now tell me, how much can you really care about politically incited violence if you are not covering this at all? If this isn't making your headlines at all? Politically motivated violence cannot matter to you if you are willfully ignoring this. And by the by, let's talk a little bit here about this whole pro-choice mantra. I find it extremely interesting that this violence is coming from the pro-choice side that wants to hold up the idea that, well, we believe in freedom for women. We believe that women should be able to have a choice. No, you don't. You believe women should have abortions. That's what you believe. Not that they should be able to have abortions, but that they should have abortions. You want abortions to be the first and only option for a woman who is considering her circumstances and is not sure whether or not she's ready to have a child and mother that child. You want abortion to be the only option for her. And we can tell this because of the pregnancy centers that are being attacked and vandalized. Pregnancy centers are not politically active groups by themselves. I'm not saying that some people in pregnancy centers, some people that work in pregnancy centers, those who support pregnancy centers, that they are not politically active. But pregnancy centers exist for one reason and one reason alone. And that is to offer support and material resources and healthcare to women who choose to carry their baby. Women who are struggling with that decision, who want more information, who want to know, if I don't choose abortion, what's out there for me? Who's going to help me? How am I going to do this? If you were actually pro-choice, you would be supporting these groups for offering an alternative for women who do not choose abortion. Planned Parenthood doesn't offer those resources. Planned Parenthood is more than happy to give you birth control pills, more than happy to give you condoms, more than happy to give you an abortion. But they won't give you ultrasounds. They won't give you prenatal care. They won't give you baby clothes and formula. They won't give you resources on parenting and motherhood and healthy relationships. They will help you prevent a pregnancy and they will help you get rid of one, but they will not help you carry one. So if you were really pro-choice, wouldn't you also be supporting groups that offer alternative resources for women who choose to do something other than abortion? But that's not what these groups are doing. These groups are attacking pregnancy centers that are providing resources at no cost to women. You also need to think about here, why is the left so militantly defending abortion? Why is this such a massive issue for them to the point where they will firebomb pregnancy clinics, where they will downplay assassination attempts on sitting Supreme Court justices? Why is this such a holy grail to them? You have to follow the money. It's interesting that the pregnancy centers that are currently being attacked, part of the reason why this is so devastating is because these pregnancy centers most often offer their services at little to no cost to the women who come through their door. Most of the people who work in these pregnancy centers are part-time workers. They are vastly underpaid for their services, including the medical staff that work there. Many of them are volunteers who aren't paid at all. And these pregnancy centers run on donations and the support of people in their local community. Some of them have support from national organizations, but by and large, their money comes from the local community and local churches and local people who want to support mothers who are in difficult circumstances. They're not making money off of this. They're not charging for their services, and it takes a while to rebuild if everything gets burned to the ground. Compare that to the abortion industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar machine. According to The Hill, Planned Parenthood brought in $1.46 billion in fiscal year 2017. That was up more than $100 million from the year before, and that was in 2017. According to CareNet, which is a pro-life organization, in 2017, the abortion industry reported $3 billion in revenue, up almost $1 billion from 2013. Nearly 75% of that market share is held by Planned Parenthood. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Threatening it, threatening abortion rights, threatens a multi-billion-dollar industry that is making some people extraordinarily wealthy. And that money then gets kicked back to the Democrats and the left-wing politicians that continue to funnel money back to Planned Parenthood. You see how this is cyclical here. Planned Parenthood rakes in billions of dollars for their services, including abortions that can cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, depending on what kind of an abortion you get and what stage of your pregnancy you are in. They then take money and raise more to donate to Democrats, who then turn around and put millions and millions and millions of dollars of government funding into Planned Parenthood. And it cycles around and around and around. This is not a financial benefit that is enjoyed by pregnancy centers, that is enjoyed by pro-life clinics that have to raise money from their local communities and are offering their services at no cost to women. So you have to ask yourself here, when you consider the money, when you consider the bias, when you consider the media slant, how pro-choice can you actually be when you are hiding stories that go against your narrative, when you're bombing pregnancy centers that offer resources to women that choose something other than abortion? You're not pro-choice. You're not pro-choice at all, and you're not pro-women. You don't want women to know the truth. You don't want women to have the full story. You don't want the American people to have the full story. You don't want the American people to know just how unhinged and violent abortion advocates really are. You don't want them to understand the rhetoric that's being used predominantly by Democrat lawmakers to incite the violence, again, using the left's own standard that's been set now for years. And as women, we have to start asking ourselves, whether you are pro-choice, whether you believe that abortion should be accessible, whether you are staunchly pro-life, wherever you are on this spectrum, as a woman, you have to start asking yourself, if I am being continually lied to, if one side is continually being hidden from me, and it's by $1 billion industry that is making money from abortions, why is that? Why is that? Is this really about protecting me? Is this really about giving me a choice? Is this really about what is best for me and my future? Is this really about defending my rights? Or is this about using women as pawns in not just a political game, but a profitable game. That's exactly what this is about. This is why the left defends abortion so vehemently, to the point where they will ignore stories that don't fit their narrative. They will turn a blind eye to violence perpetrated by abortion advocates, and why you are not seeing any of these stories in the headlines. And we're going to continue to cover them in the weeks to come. I do think that the Supreme Court decision is going to be handed down soon. That will be very interesting. My theory, personally, just if you want to know what I think a huge part of the reason why this is not one of the decisions that has been handed down the pipe yet, if I were a betting woman, I would say it's likely because this will be one of the last decisions that is handed down, because I really do worry that the threat against those justices that did vote in favor of overturning Roe is going to increase. I think what we just saw with the Kavanaugh situation has only proven that, and I'm wondering if they know that as soon as this comes down, they're going to have to get the heck out of Dodge. So my guess is that it's not going to come down until pretty late in the game, so we'll stay on top of that over the summer. In the meantime, make sure that you go online, check out full episodes of The Brittany Hughes Show on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. You also need to go over to iTunes, hit the subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. I will see you back here next week. Thanks for tuning in.